Welcome, my friends, and thank you from the heart for being here. If you enjoy this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. And now, let the story begin. The summer of '89 had been exceptionally miserable. Since mid-July, the rain had fallen almost without stopping, turning the Cascade Mountain trails into thick mud and dragging a dense gray shroud across the sky above Coldwater Ridge Ranger Station. Ethan Cole, my senior partner and mentor, and I were sitting in the duty room, where the air smelled of dampness, coffee, and wet uniforms. Ethan was cleaning his old Remington, each movement practiced, calm and measured. I stared out the window at the wall of rain, listening to its dull, endless drumming on the tin roof, feeling that familiar melancholy tighten around my chest. I was 26, and it felt as if the gray would never end. Then the door burst open with enough force to slam against the wall. And there he was, a man around 25, tall, athletic, but in that moment looked more like a trapped animal than a person. His expensive storm jacket had been torn to shreds. His face was scratched. His eyes were wild with a primal terror that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. He was breathing hard, gasping for air, and only a hoarse whisper managed to leave his lips. There. It's there. Ethan immediately set the shotgun aside. Easy. Son, easy. You're safe now. What happened? The man collapsed to his knees on the dirty rubber mat by the entrance. His backpack, new and expensive, clearly made for serious hiking, slid from his shoulder and thudded beside him. A small camera and a waterproof case slipped from one of the side pockets and dropped to the floor. He was trembling all over, unable to stand, unable to say anything that made sense. Just then, Deputy Claire Marsh walked in. She had only been out of the academy for a couple of months. Young, determined, with short-cropped blonde hair and clear, serious eyes. Despite her youth, she carried herself with confidence. When she saw the man, she did not hesitate. What's going on? Good Lord, she rushed to him, helping him up. Ethan, Nathan, help me get him seated. Together we half-carried, half-dragged the trembling man onto the squeaky couch against the wall. Claire took a blanket from the first aid kit along with some smelling salts. The sharp scent made the man flinch and cough, but his stare became a little more focused. Water, he rasped. I brought him a glass from the cooler. He emptied it in one go, his fingers shaking so badly that water spilled down his chin. My name is Marcus, he swallowed. Marcus Vane. They're out there. It took them. Who took them? Marcus, Claire asked gently, steadying his shoulders. Who? I don't know. It was huge, dark, like a shadow. He began shaking again. Meanwhile, Ethan was going through Marcus's backpack. Attached to the flap inside a plastic sleeve was a photograph. Marcus stood with two others, a smiling Asian girl and a guy with a slightly wild, excited look in his eyes. They were posing against the backdrop of some mountain peak. Your friends? Ethan asked, showing him the photo. Marcus nodded. Tears carved clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. Lena and Owen. We went. He sobbed. We shouldn't have. Ethan frowned, pulling a worn map from the side pocket of the pack. A spot had been marked with a red exit was far from the official Pacific Crest Trail, in an area marked on maps as Widows Glen. It was a place even we Rangers tried to avoid unless we absolutely had to go there, officially because of frequent landslides. But there were other reasons, stories the old-timers told in hushed voices around campfires. Stories that made your skin crawl. It took another half hour, hot sweet tea, and Ethan's repeated assurances before Marcus Vane could give us anything more coherent. He sat wrapped in the blanket, still shivering, but his eyes held less madness now and more shock and despair. Claire wrote down his statement in her notebook, her pen scratching methodically across the paper. It was the only sound breaking through the drumming rain and Marcus's ragged breathing. We were hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, he began in a hollow voice. Owen, he was always into legends, urban myths, you know. He read somewhere about an old miner's trail that led to abandoned gold rush working, said the views were incredible, untouched nature. He also mentioned legends about stick Indians and some place called Widows Glen. At the mention of Widows Glen, Ethan visibly tensed. He walked over to the table where Marcus's map lay open with the red X. "This is where you turned off." His voice was even, but I caught the concern beneath it. Marcus nodded. "Yeah." Owen swore he knew a shortcut. Lena, she's a biologist. She was collecting moss and lichen samples. I'm a photographer. I wanted to shoot something unique. We decided to leave the main trail for just a day or two. His voice broke. What idiots we were. "Marcus, what exactly happened? What did you see?" At first everything was fine. Marcus rubbed his temples. "Well, almost. The place was strange. Quiet enough to make your ears. Ring fog settled there even during the day. It clung to the trees like spider webs. And the smell?" He swallowed. "Sometimes it smelled like wet earth and pine. Other times it smelled like rot. A sweet, sickening kind of rot. Owen joked that it was the spirits of old miners wandering around. Then yesterday evening, we made camp near an old broken-down cabin." "A cabin?" Ethan cut in. "There's a cabin out there?" "Yeah, a log cabin, completely run down. Inside, someone had burned a figure into the wall, creepy. Tall, with branches for antlers." My heart skipped. I remembered the old carved mask the former sheriff, an Indian man, had left at the station before retiring. It showed something similar, and inside it there had been a note. "Copper holds back the void." I had always dismissed it as folklore. "What happened after that, Marcus?" My own voice sounded hoarse. At night, the sound started. First it was rustling, twig snapping. We thought it was an animal. Owen went outside with a flashlight to check. He didn't come back. We called him, yelled for him. Nothing answered us but silence. And then we heard his voice. He was calling to us, asking for help. But the voice was wrong. Mechanical, distorted, like something was copying him. Marcus began shaking violently again. Lena got scared. She said it was a trap. We huddled inside the tent. "I want you to stop and understand something before I tell you what happened next." Marcus Vane was not a fragile person. He was an experienced hiker, fit, rational. The man sitting on our couch shaking so hard he could barely hold a glass of water was what the thing in Widow's Glen had left behind. Whatever came out of that tent, whatever ripped through the fabric like it was nothing, was the same thing we were about to walk into. And then it came. I didn't see it clearly, just a shadow. Huge, sliding between the trees. It ripped the tent open like paper. I heard Lena scream, and I ran. I just ran blind through bushes and over rocks. I ran all night and all day until I saw the lights of your station. He buried his face in his hands. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. Ethan stared at the map, at the red X buried in the heart of Widow's Glen. His face was as dark as a storm cloud. "Widow's Glen," he muttered. "The old-timers didn't give it that name for nothing. They said the forest steals voices there." He looked up at me, then at Claire. "Officially, the area is closed because of landslides. Unofficially, people have vanished there before, back in my grandfather's time." "So we're going," Claire said firmly, though I saw fear pass through her eyes. "We're going," Ethan confirmed. His stare left no room for argument. He was the senior ranger. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, and he would not leave people in danger no matter what the legends said. I nodded, feeling a cold knot form in my throat. We were going to Widow's Glen, to the place Marcus Vane had fled from, half dead with terror. Getting ready did not take long. Standard mountain search and rescue gear. First aid kit, ropes, powerful flashlights, extra food and water, signal flares. Ethan took his trusted Remington 870 loaded with buckshot, good for a grizzly or a cougar, but I was not sure it would do much against a shadow. Claire fastened her standard issue .38 service revolver to her belt. I slid a heavy hunting knife into my waistband and checked the radio. We loaded everything into the old but reliable police Ford pickup, a four-wheel drive beast that could keep going long after an ordinary car would have quit. We left Marcus at the station with the dispatcher, an older woman named Agnes Reed, who had worked there longer than I had been alive. She knew how to make strong coffee and calm terrified tourists. Right then, Marcus needed both. The pickup's engine growled. The tires chewed through mud. The wipers could barely fight off the curtain of water and fog smeared across the windshield. We drove in silence. Ethan was behind the wheel, focused, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Claire sat beside him, studying the map under the beam of a small flashlight. I sat in the back, staring out the side window at the passing silhouettes of giant Douglas firs and cedars buried in the gray haze. The higher we climbed, the stronger that irrational sense of dread became. The air itself seemed thick and weighted. The forest outside, usually majestic and calm, now looked sinister, like a predator waiting in cover. About an hour into the drive, we saw it. On the shoulder of the road, beneath a spreading fir tree, lay a deer, or what was left of one. The sight turned my stomach. Someone or something had opened the carcass with surgical precision. The chest cavity had been opened. The organs were gone. But there were no signs of a fight. No torn-up ground. No scattered tufts of fur, the kind you would expect after a cougar or bear attack. Just a carcass cleanly emptied, left beside the road. A bear doesn't do this, Ethan muttered, slowing the pickup. Neither does a cougar, Claire added, her face pale. I said nothing, but the chill moving down my spine turned to ice. I remembered Marcus's words. Owen. The shadow. We kept driving. And the fog hung strangely low, swirling like something alive, slipping into hollows and hiding the bases of the trees. It felt as if we were driving through milk. Visibility shrank to only a few yards. Ethan switched on the fog lights. Their yellow beams barely cut into the thick veil. Then the radio hissed. Communication was always unreliable, in those parts. But now something strange began pushing through the static. It was not human speech. It was some kind of melody, quiet, repetitive, like a lullaby or a ritual chant. But something about it was wrong, eerie. The sound seemed to move backward, warped and distorted, stirring nausea and a fear I could not explain. What the hell is that? Claire asked, tapping the radio. Ethan turned it off. Interference. Strong magnetic fields from ore deposits, probably. But I saw his Adam's apple move. He had heard it too, and he did not believe it was magnetic fields. The pickup turned off the main road and onto a barely visible track, the beginning of the old miner's trail marked on Marcus's map. The road here was worse, overgrown, rutted, branches lashed against the windows. The wheels sank into mud. We crept forward, deeper into the heart of fog and fear. The cabin Marcus had mentioned could not be far now. I felt it in my gut. Nothing good was waiting for us there. The pickup could go no farther. The trail had narrowed into a rain-washed path littered with fallen branches and rocks. We had to leave the truck behind and continue on foot. Dusk was falling fast, changing the forest into a world of shadows and blurred silhouettes. We moved in single file. Ethan went first, cutting a path through the wet underbrush with a machete. Claire followed, gripping her flashlight. I brought up the rear, constantly glancing back, listening to the crushing silence. The silence was almost complete. Only our breathing broke it. The squelch of our boots in the mud, the steady drip of water. No birds, no insects, not even the faintest breeze. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The air smelled of rotting leaves, wet earth, and that same sweet rotten scent Marcus had described. Then Ethan's flashlight struck something dark and massive, something that almost blended into the gloom around it. The cabin. It looked worse than I had imagined. Built from enormous logs blackened by time and dampness, it leaned dangerously to one side. The roof had collapsed inward. The door hung from one rusty hinge, gaping like a black mouth. "This is it," Ethan said hoarsely. "Looks over 100 years old. Gold rush era, just like the kid said." We approached carefully. The doorway opened into one single room swallowed in darkness. Inside, the smell was mold, mice, and old soot. Ethan shone his light in. The furnishings were bare and crude. A rough table, Against the wall, an overturned stool, the remains of a stone hearth in the corner, and there, on the far wall directly opposite the entrance, was the figure. A huge silhouette had been burned into the wood with soot from the hearth. It covered almost the entire wall from floor to the rotting ceiling beams, unnaturally tall. Thin, impossibly long limbs that ended in something like claws. Its head was too small for its body, crowned with branching growths that looked like deer antlers or dry twigs. But the worst part was the face, or rather, the absence of one. Where the eyes should have been, two deep empty sockets yawned as if burned straight through the wood. Something ancient was in it, something evil, something hungry. Beside the silhouette, someone had carved numbers into one of the logs. D9, 100 years ago. For 100 years that nightmare drawing had stared with empty sockets at anyone foolish enough to step inside. "Good Lord," Claire whispered, aiming her flashlight at the silhouette. Her voice trembled. Ethan studied the burned figure in silence. His face gave nothing away, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. I stepped closer to the wall. A faint smell came from the silhouette, the same rot mixed with something burned, like the air after a lightning strike. This was not some random drawing, it was a warning or an icon. "We need to check outside," Ethan said, forcing his eyes away from the wall. "Look for signs of Owen and Lena. Maybe they left something, some kind of trace." We left the cabin, leaving behind the oppressive air and the eerie silhouette watching our backs with its empty sockets. Outside, fog slipped through the doorway and the cracks in the walls, like pale, severed fingers. We started searching, moving slowly around the cabin, sweeping the ground, the bushes, the tree trunks, looking for signs of a struggle. Pieces of clothing, anything. We spread out a little, but stayed within sight of one another. Nothing. Claire's voice came through, warped by static, just old campfire traces. "Nothing here either." Ethan answered, "No sign of a struggle, like they simply disappeared." I moved my flashlight slowly across the ground. Mud. Last year's leaves, a couple of rusty tin cans. Then, the beam caught something wrong. Several branches were broken on a bush leading into a thick stand of young firs just off the clearing, as if someone had crashed through them. "Ethan, Claire, over here, I think I found something." They were beside me within minutes. We followed the trail of broken branches carefully. The rotten smell grew stronger here, mixed with another scent, the sweet metallic smell of blood. My heart began pounding harder. About 10 yards in, the thicket opened and we saw him. Owen Drake lay on his back, arms thrown wide, staring at the foggy sky with dead, unseeing eyes. What had been done to him was beyond comprehension. The left side of his face was simply gone, as if something had struck him with monstrous force, reducing bone and flesh to a bloody ruin. His jacket and shirt had been torn open, exposing his chest. It had been opened. His ribs jutted outward, and inside, there was nothing. No lungs, no heart, no other organs. Everything had been cleaned out all the way down to the spine, which gleamed white deep inside the wound with a horrible stark brightness. There was no pool of blood around the body, only a few dark stains on the ground. As if the blood had been carefully collected, Claire made a choked sound and turned away, covering her mouth. Her face went white as a sheet. Even Ethan, who had seen plenty of terrible things in his career, recoiled, his face twisted with disgust and horror. I stood frozen in place, unable to look away. Ethan knelt beside the body, careful not to touch it. His eyes stayed fixed on the ruined chest cavity. Then he slowly raised his head and looked at me, then at Claire. His mouth tightened into a thin line. "Hollow Walker," he whispered, so quietly I barely heard it over the pounding in my ears. The name hung in the cold fog, giving the air a new and terrible meaning. It was no longer an old wife's tale, no longer just a frightening silhouette burned onto a cabin wall. It was real, a brutal, hungry reality that had left this behind, the hollowed-out body of Owen Drake, the lover of urban legends who had found what he was searching for and paid a terrible price. "It feeds on them," Claire forced out, still refusing to look at the body. "Not just flesh," Ethan said, his voice hollow. The legends say it takes the soul, leaves an empty shell. Hollow. We could not take the body. Our main task was to find Lena Chun and get out of there. We need to head back to the cabin, I said, finally tearing my eyes away from Owen. It's safer to wait for dawn there. Ethan nodded. Claire, still pale but pulling herself back together, agreed. Back inside the cabin, Ethan braced the unstable door shut with a heavy log he found inside. Claire checked her revolver, the cylinder clicking softly. I set my pack against the wall and took out the strongest flashlight, placing it on the table to light the entrance. We sat listening to the sounds beyond the walls. The wind moaned through the gaps between the logs, shaping itself into an eerie melody. About an hour passed. Ethan sat on the overturned stool with the Remington across his knees, his heavy stare fixed on the darkness beyond the door. Claire paced like a caged animal, stopping first by the wall with the terrifying silhouette, then by the doorway. Tried to drive the image of Owen's mutilated body out of my head. It kept coming back. Then we heard, it quiet at first, barely audible beneath the rain and wind. A muffled woman's cry. It came from the woods, from the direction where we had found Owen's body. The crying grew louder. Then words began to break through it. Help me. Please. I'm here. I'm so cold. Help me. It was Lena Chun's voice, recognizable though warped by distance and fear. Claire froze near the doorway, listening. Her face held both hope and horror. It's her, she whispered. Lena. She's alive. She grabbed her flashlight and moved toward the exit. We have to go. Stop. Ethan barked. Springing to his feet, he caught Claire by the arm and held her back. It's a trap. Claire, remember what Marcus said. It mimics voices, but what if it really is her? Claire snapped. What if she needs help? We can't just sit here. Her eyes flashed. She was young, driven by the need to save people. It's not her, I said firmly, standing up. At that moment I caught it again, that sharp, sickening smell of decay and rot mixed with the clean bite of ozone after a thunderstorm. It came from the doorway, and it was getting stronger. It's here, I said, right outside. It's using her voice to split us up. The crying outside grew louder, more desperate. Nathan, Ethan, help me, I'm scared, please. The voice was a perfect imitation of Lena's. It tore at the soul. Claire hesitated, her hand resting on the grip of her revolver. The struggle was plain on her face, professional duty, human compassion, cold, paralyzing fear. Claire, listen, Ethan said quietly, but with force we'll find her. But not like this, not by walking straight into its tricks. If we go out now, especially one at a time, we all die like Owen. The crying stopped abruptly. Only the rain remained. Then a gust of wind pushed into the cabin, carrying a wave of putrid stench. We froze and listened. Nothing. As if someone had switched off a recording. Claire slowly lowered her hand. Okay, she whispered, stepping back from the door. What do we do? Wait, Ethan replied, sitting down again and tightening his grip on the shotgun. We wait for dawn and hope this thing fears the light. He looked around the cabin. In the meantime, we try to learn more about it. Maybe there's something else in here besides that damn drawing. He nodded toward the hearth and the old junk scattered across the floor. While Ethan carefully inspected the weak door, Claire and I began searching the cabin. The floor was covered with dust, rotten leaves, and mouse droppings. Cobwebs sagged in the corners. We moved carefully, trying not to make noise, constantly listening to the sounds outside. In the corner near the hearth was a pile of junk. Rusty prospectors, tools, a pickaxe with a broken handle, a couple of leaking kettles. Beneath, a heap of rags, the remains of an old wool blanket. Claire found a kerosene lamp, old copper, covered in a thick layer of patina and grime, but somehow still intact. There was even a little kerosene left inside. Look, Nathan, she whispered. Maybe we can light it. With fingers numbed by cold and tension, I cleaned the glass and checked the wick dry, but whole. I struck a match and held the flame to it. The wick flared to life with an uneven hiss. Soon the cabin filled with a warm, yellowish glow. The lamplight changed the miserable little cabin. Shadows moved across the walls. The silhouette burned into the wood seemed to come alive. The flickering flame created the illusion of movement in its long limbs. The empty sockets appeared to watch. From the darkness, the antler crown cast strange, twitching shadows across the ceiling. And yet the lamplight gave us a fragile sense of warmth and protection. We should check beneath the floorboards, Ethan suggested, his eyes still fixed on the door. Prospectors often made hiding places. The floor was made of rough, badly fitted planks. I chose the board near the hearth that looked the most suspicious and worked my knife blade under it. It came up with a creak, revealing a small hollow underneath. Inside, wrapped in rotting burlap, lay a small object, a diary, thick notebook bound in battered leather. The leather was dry and cracked. The pages were yellowed and brittle from age, no markings on the cover. I opened it, carefully found it. I whispered. Ethan and Claire came closer, leaning over the discovery in the lamplight. What I need you to understand about what came next is that everything that had happened to us since Marcus Vane walked through that door was about to make complete, terrible sense. It was the diary of a prospector named Silas Alderman. He had come here looking for gold like so many others. The first entries were full of hope and descriptions of a hard life. But then the tone began to change. October 1888, getting colder, little gold. The forest here is strange, quiet, too quiet. Sometimes, it feels like someone is watching from behind the trees. The other prospectors laugh. They say it is mountain fever. December 1888. Old man Harker is missing. Went to check his snares and never came back. Sheriff came from town. Shrugged. Said a bear got him or he lost his way. But I saw tracks near his cabin. Huge ones, not human. January 1889. Heard screams last night. Not an animal. Human. Then a voice called my name. Harker's voice. I did not go outside. Barricaded myself in and prayed until morning. March 1889. Found strange drawings in a cave near the creek. Ancient. They show a tall man with antlers. The Indians who sometimes come down from the mountains call him in whispers, Hollow Walker. They say he comes from a fissure in the earth when the moon is dark. He is hungry. He takes the soul and leaves emptiness. April 1889. Saw him in the fog, gliding between the trees like a shadow. Tall black. No eyes, only emptiness. He fears fire and red metal. The Indians leave copper charms be their lodges. The last entry had been written in a trembling hand, May 1889. He comes every night, scratches at the door, whispers in my own voice. I have lit all the lamps, surrounded myself with copper nuggets I found in the creek. I do not know if it will help. With soot on the wall, I drew his likeness to remember, to warn. If you find this, run. Run from Widow's Glen before he takes your... The entry ended there. The pages after it were blank. We looked at one another in silence. The diary confirmed our worst fears. The monster was real. It had existed there for more than 100 years. It mimicked voices. It hunted people. It took their essence and left empty shells behind. And it feared fire. And copper. Copper, Claire murmured, her eyes lowering to the kerosene lamp in her hands. It was copper. Old and tarnished. But copper. The old Indian sheriff had left that note about copper and the void. At that moment, a deafening crash came from outside, as if something enormous had slammed down onto the weak roof. Debris rained over us. One of the ceiling beams above our heads groaned ominously. The lamplight flickered. It was here, and it knew we were inside. The crash above us came again, louder this time. Clumps of dirt, splinters of wood, and dust fell from the ceiling. One of the rotten beams directly above the table sagged lower, threatening to collapse. It's on the roof, Claire cried, raising her revolver. Ethan was already on his feet, shotgun ready, aiming at the ceiling. More light, he shouted. Don't let the lamp go out. But it was too late. The next second, the beam gave way. With a deafening crack, it snapped. And through the hole torn open in the roof, wrapped in dust and fog, it crashed into the cabin. I never got a clear look at it. Only a quick, broken impression. A shifting shadow. A mass of long, bony limbs covered in something dark, like bark or burned skin. It moved with unnatural jerking speed and landed on the floor with a heavy thud that made the floorboards shake. For an instant, the antler shape blocked the lamplight, and I saw the empty sockets where darkness seemed to churn. Before any of us could react, the creature lunged at Ethan. One long arm like a tree branch lashed through the air. There was a wet, sickening crack. His bone broke. Ethan cried out in pain and went down, dropping the shotgun. His left arm twisted at an impossible angle. His collarbone. Ethan, Claire screamed. Without hesitating, she opened fire. The roar of the .38 in that tight space was deafening. The bullet struck the dark figure. I saw them punch into it, tearing small, ragged holes in its body. But what oozed out was not blood. It was a thick, dark fluid, viscous and black like tar. The creature released a hissing, gurgling sound like stones grinding together, and staggered backward. But it did not fall. The bullets seemed to hurt it only as an irritation, not as any real damage. It turned toward Claire. Its long, clawed fingers twitched. She managed to fire one more shot before scrambling back and stumbling over the stool. That was when my eyes fell on the copper kerosene lamp, still burning on the table. The diary. Silas Alderman had written about copper. The Indians had left copper charms. The old sheriff. Copper holds back the void. Acting on instinct, I grabbed the hot lamp by its base, burning my fingers. "Back, you beast!" I shouted, thrusting the lamp forward like a shield. The warm light and the copper gleam struck the dark figure directly. Its reaction was immediate and shocking. The creature let out a piercing, high-pitched hiss full of pain and hatred. It recoiled from the copper object as if struck by electricity. The empty sockets seemed to lock onto the lamp, onto that hated source of metal and light. It hissed again, retreating toward the darkest corner of the cabin where the lamplight was weaker. Its movements became less certain, more broken. Ethan groaned on the floor, trying to push himself up with his good arm. The hollow walker crouched in the darkest corner, nearly blending into the shadows. It was not leaving, it was waiting. The hissing continued, scraping at the nerves like a rusty nail dragged across glass. We were trapped. The creature was inside with us. Ethan was badly hurt. Claire was running low on ammunition, and the only weapon we had against that ancient thing was the flame of the kerosene lamp and its copper body. I tightened my grip on the lamp. The heat of the metal and the light gave us a thin thread of hope. But I knew it was only temporary. The creature was wounded, enraged, cornered, and it was still there with us inside that cramped, collapsing cabin in the middle of a cursed forest. The night had only just begun. The tension inside the cabin reached its breaking point. None of us moved. Me holding the burning hot lamp. Claire gripping her reloaded revolver. Ethan leaning against the wall, grimacing in pain, and the creature hidden in the deepest corner, giving off a low, threatening hiss. The hollow walker moved slowly along the wall, trying to stay within the dark. Its empty sockets remained fixed on the lamp. It was searching for weakness, for a chance to get around the hated light and metal. "Don't let it get past you," Ethan rasped. He tried to lift his Remington with his good hand, but pain made him gasp at once. I backed away, keeping the lamp between myself and the creature. But the cabin was too small. It moved faster than I expected, its long limbs sliding silently over the filthy floor. Claire raised her revolver. "Move, Nathan." But before she could fire, the creature suddenly rushed forward. Not at me, at the table. The open diary was still lying there. One long clawed hand swept it to the floor. At the same time, it struck the table and knocked it over. The lamp, which I had instinctively clutched, was ripped from my burned hands. The copper base hit the floor with a dull thud. The glass shattered. Kerosene splashed across the dry planks and caught fire instantly from the fallen wick. Bright orange flames surged upward, quickly swallowing the old table, the spilled fuel, and the dry floorboards. The cabin filled at once with acrid smoke and violent heat. The hollow walker howled, not a hiss this time, a piercing shriek filled with terror. Fire. Its second fear after copper. The creature scrambled wildly around the cabin, trying to escape the flames spreading fast around it. Tongues of fire crawled up the walls, reaching toward the silhouette burned there a century before. "Out now," I yelled, grabbing Claire's arm, pulling her toward the door. "Ethan." Claire turned back. Ethan struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. His face was twisted with pain, but determination burned in his eyes. "I'll hold it off. Get the radio. Go." "No," Claire cried. "We're not leaving you. You don't have a choice," Ethan roared. He picked up his shotgun with his good hand. "The fire scares it, but it'll come back. Run. That's an order." Flames already covered half the cabin. The heat was unbearable. Smoke stung our eyes. The hollow walker, whining and hissing, darted near the far wall, cut off from the exit by the fire. Ethan moved toward the doorway, blocking the creature's path. He looked back at us. For one moment, a sad smile flickered across his face. "Nathan, look after Claire, and tell my wife." "Ethan, no." I started toward him, but he shoved me back with his good shoulder. "Go on." A fresh howl came from inside the cabin. The creature was breaking through the fire. Ethan turned to face the blazing room and raised his shotgun. Claire grabbed my arm. "Nathan, he's right. We have to go." I snatched Ethan's radio from where it lay near the door. The last thing I saw, before Claire dragged me outside, was the silhouette of Ethan Cole standing in the threshold of the burning cabin, ready to meet his fate, ready to give us a chance. We stumbled out into the cold rain. Fire burst from the windows and from the hole in the cabin roof, lighting the foggy forest with a gruesome, bloody glow. From inside came the boom of shotgun blasts, the furious roar of the hollow walker, the crackle of burning wood, then the deafening crash of the roof collapsing, and silence, only the roar of flames, only the rain. The cabin had become a funeral pyre, a pyre of logs, old hopes, a prospector's diary, and screams. Somewhere inside that inferno, Ethan remained. My mentor. My friend. Tears burned in my eyes, mixing with the rain on my cheeks. But there was no time for grief. We were alone in the middle of a hostile forest with a dead radio and the knowledge that the creature might still be alive. We ran. Away from the burning cabin, away from the horror that seemed to follow at our heels. Rain whipped our faces. I pulled Claire by the hand. She stumbled, but she kept moving. Her breathing was ragged, but she gritted her teeth and ran. In my other hand, I clutched Ethan's radio. I stopped for a moment, trying to reach the station. Only static answered. Now and then it was broken by those same eerie, distorted sounds, like children's rhymes played backward. "It's useless," Claire said, breathing hard. "We need to keep moving." "Where?" I looked around. We had run blindly into some unknown part of Widow's Glen. The map was gone, burned with the diary, and Ethan. We're lost. "I don't know," I admitted. "We need to find shelter. Wait out the rain. Try to get our bearings at dawn." Then I remembered something. Something Ethan had mentioned once, almost in passing, on a quiet afternoon at the station months before any of this happened. He had been looking at an old survey map off the Widow's Glen area, the kind filed by the Geological Survey team that had done exploratory work in those mountains years earlier. He had pointed to a section of the map and said, "If you ever end up lost out there, look for the old mine workings along the lower ridge." They drilled test holes, left a cache of equipment, and then, almost as an afterthought, there should be dynamite. I had not thought about that in months. I thought about it now. We moved on more slowly, but the ground only grew worse. The slope dropped steeply downward. Mud mixed with sharp little stones beneath our boots. Walking became brutally difficult. Our feet kept slipping, threatening to send us tumbling down into the foggy unknown. Had Ethan killed the creature or only made it angrier? Fire might have slowed the hollow walker. But destroying something so ancient and evil seemed impossible. We slid and scrambled down the scree, grabbing wet roots and sparse bushes to keep from falling. Our clothes were soaked through. The cold bit deep. Claire held up well, but I could see she was near her limit. Her face was pale, her lips had gone blue. "Nathan, look," she said suddenly, pointing downward. Through the fog thinning near the ground, we saw it, a black opening in the mountainside, partly covered by a rusty metal grate torn loose from its hinges. An old mine ventilation shaft. Warmth drifted from the shaft, an unpleasant stale warmth mixed with the smell of rot and damp earth. Not exactly welcoming shelter, but a chance. And if the mine workings ran in the right direction, possibly much more than that. "In there?" Claire asked doubtfully. I looked at the gaping blackness of the shaft, then at the foggy forest around us. There was no choice. Looks like our only chance. At least it's dry, and it has walls. And if Ethan was right about what's down there, it might be the last weapon we have. We approached the edge of the shaft carefully. It dropped straight down into darkness. The remains of a rusty metal ladder were visible along the wall, but several of the upper rungs were missing. "I'll go first," I decided. "Check it out." "No, I'll go," Claire said. "You're injured." She nodded toward my burned palms, which I could barely feel through the cold and adrenaline. She secured the rope around herself, checked the knot, swung her legs over the edge, and began her descent. A minute later, her flashlight blinked from below. Clear. "Come on down." Her voice echoed upward, distorted. I fastened the radio to my belt, slung my pack over my back, and started down after her. The shaft walls were damp and slick. They smelled of molden. Something else, something ancient, something sinister. Warm, rotten air rose from below and wrapped around me in a suffocating wave. I landed on solid ground beside Clary in a small tunnel leading into darkness. A mine shaft, the beast's lair, or just an old working. The answer waited ahead of us in that underground dark. Utsum. We stood inside a narrow drift carved through the rock. Our flashlight beams tore rough, uneven walls out of the darkness. They were coated in slime and some kind of pale, whitish fungal growth. Water dripped from the ceiling in a steady, monotonous rhythm. "Looks like an old exploration drift," Claire said, aiming her flashlight deeper into the tunnel. Probably no one has been down here in decades, but she was wrong. After only a few steps, we started finding signs. At first it was just bones, mostly small ones, rodents, birds, maybe foxes or raccoons that had fallen into the shaft by accident. Then we saw larger remains, deer antlers, the jawbone of a big animal, maybe a bear, and then human bones. A skull stared at us from a pile of rubble, its sockets empty. Then we found the charms, small crudely shaped figures and simple discs of tarnished copper, scattered across the tunnel floor, exactly like the ones Silas Alderman had written about in his diary. Indian wards, or the wards of people who had tried to hide from the hollow walker down here beneath the earth. "They knew," Claire whispered, picking up one of the charms. It was a rough copper circle with a hole through it. They tried to protect themselves. The tunnel widened slightly, opening into a small cavern. In the center was a dark patch, the remains of a fire pit. Torches leaned against the walls. Several were resin-soaked sticks wedged into cracks in the stone. One of them was still faintly smoldering, giving off a thin thread of smoke and a weak orange glow. Someone had been here very recently. "It's like an altar," Claire said, her voice trembling. The bones, the copper charms, the smoldering torch. Together they formed a sinister image of an ancient ritual place, a place of sacrifice, or a lair. Then Claire's flashlight caught movement at the far end of the cavern. A figure sat on a rock, back turned to us, a female figure. Long dark hair spilled over her shoulders. Her clothes were torn and filthy. "Lena," Claire whispered, taking one step forward. The figure slowly turned its head. It was her, Lena Chun. But she was not the smiling girl from the photograph on Marcus's backpack. Her skin had taken on a sickly gray-blue color, like the skin of someone pulled from deep water. Her eyes were open wide, but empty, lifeless. Her pupils were unnaturally enlarged. Her hands rested on her knees. Her fingers looked longer than they should have been, tipped with pointed, darkened nails. She looked at us without expression, as if we were no different from the stone wall. Lena. Oh my God. Lena, you're alive. Claire rushed toward her. Stop, I shouted, but it was too late. Claire reached Lena and grabbed her by the shoulders. Lena, it's us. Nathan and Claire, we came for you. Lena slowly turned her vacant stare toward her. Her lips moved. A low scraping sound came from her throat, something only faintly similar to human speech. Cold, it rasped, empty. Then her gaze shifted to me. For one terrible moment, one impossible moment, a flicker of recognition passed through those empty eyes. Her pupils tightened, her mouth twisted into something like a pained grimace. Nathan, she whispered almost normally. And in that single word was all her suffering, all the horror of what was happening to her. Then her eyes went vacant again. She shoved Claire away with shocking strength, sending her stumbling back into the wall. Lena rose to her feet. She seemed taller now. Her movements were jerky, unnatural. She took a step toward us, and I saw sharp ribs pressing beneath her torn jacket, as if her body had begun to wither and stretch. The transformation was almost complete. She was no longer Lena Chun. She was a vessel, a shell, being slowly filled by the alien-hungry emptiness of the hollow walker. Claire scrambled back to her feet, her hand flying to her revolver. I faced a horrible choice. Saving her was impossible now. Leaving her there meant allowing the transformation to finish, condemning her to an eternal existence as the monster's puppet. Lena's pained voice still echoed in my ears. Nathan. I looked at Claire, at her pale, determined face, at her hand on the revolver. Then I looked at the thing that had once been Lena Chun, slowly moving toward us, dragging its feet and making soft, gurgling sounds. Claire, back, I shouted, pushing her behind me, out of the cavern, and into the narrow drift. The creature that had been Lena stopped at the edge of our flashlight beams. Its empty eyes watched us. Nathan, we can't just... Claire started to speak, but I cut her off. The Lena we came looking for is gone, I said harshly, trying to hide my own pain. That isn't her anymore. We can't help her, but we can stop this. My eyes dropped to the smoldering torch in the center of the cavern, then to the scattered bones, the copper charms, and then I remembered what Ethan had said on that quiet afternoon months ago. There should be dynamite. We need to find the geologist's cache, I told Claire. Ethan said it was somewhere around here in the old workings. There should be dynamite. Claire looked at me with horror and understanding. You want to collapse the mine? Seal it. Bury this thing here with its victims. It's the only way to make sure it doesn't take anyone else. I nodded toward the cavern where Lena's figure stood frozen, and maybe set her free. We moved down the drift, leaving the cavern behind. We moved quickly, sweeping our lights into side tunnels and old stopes. The mine was a true labyrinth, but I remembered the general direction Ethan had once pointed out on that old map, and we found it, in a dead-end tunnel, behind a rockfall, the small cache. Several crates of tools, cans of fuel, and yes, several wooden boxes marked dynamite, old, possibly damp, but dynamite, coils of fuse and detonators lay nearby. Work fast, I ordered. We hauled several of the heaviest crates back, toward the main drift, the one leading to the ventilation shaft in the cavern with Lena, measured out enough fusée to light it and still have time to climb out. While I prepared the charge, linking the dynamite sticks and inserting the detonators, Claire stood guard, shining her flashlight down the passage toward the cavern. Nathan, she whispered after a few minutes, it's coming. I turned at the far end of the drift, where it bent toward the cavern, a silhouette appeared, Not Lena. This one was much taller, thinner, with the unmistakable antlers rising from its head. The hollow walker. It moved slowly but relentlessly. Its shadow danced across the tunnel, walls in our flashlight beams. The hissing we had heard in the cabin now echoed through the mine, amplified again and again. Finish it, Claire urged, raising her revolver. I secured the last detonator and unspooled the fuse toward the exit. Claire, get topside fast. I'll distract it and light the fuse. I'm not leaving you. This isn't a discussion, I snapped. You have to get out and tell them what happened. Here, climb now. She hesitated for 1 second, then she nodded, her eyes bright with tears and resolve. Take care. She ran for the rope leading upward. I grabbed one of the smoldering torches and a copper pickaxe sling near the crates. Fire and copper, my only weapons. The hollow walker came closer, taller in the narrow tunnel. More. Wrong. The hiss deepened into a growl. Thrust the torch and the copper pickaxe out in front of me. The creature stopped. It hissed. Louder. It was afraid. But hunger and rage were stronger than fear. Come on, you bastard! I shouted, taking a step toward it. Try and take me. The creature released a piercing shriek and lunged. I jumped aside. Swinging the torch, fire licked across the dark figure. It howled in pain and recoiled. I struck its outstretched arm with the copper pickaxe. There was a dry crack. The creature hissed again and retreated a step. I heard Claire reach the top. Good. Now it was my turn. While the hollow walker hesitated, I touched the torch to the end of the Bickford fuse. It hissed and sparked brightly. Then the flame began racing along it toward the dynamite charge. Goodbye, beast, I yelled. Then I scrambled for the rope. The hollow walker roared and lunged after me. I grabbed the rope, my already burned palms searing with pain, and started climbing as fast as I could. The creature reached the base of the shaft. Its long fingers scraped against the rock, trying to catch my feet. Then the roar came. A deafening explosion shook the earth. A wave of heat blasted upward, nearly throwing me from the rope. The shaft filled with the thunder of collapsing stone, dust and smoke. Below me I saw a flash of fire, and something gleamed molten copper from the charms and the pickaxe, scattered like fiery tears from the mountain. Claire grabbed me and pulled me out of the shaft. Only moments before, the entrance collapsed, completely beneath rock and earth. We lay on the wet ground, deafened and choking on dust, staring at the place where the entrance to that underground hell had been. It was over. The hollow walker was buried beneath tons of rock, sealed by fire and copper, along with Lena, along with the bones of its other victims. August 31st, 2024. Midnight again. The kitchen again. The dark oak table. The single glass of Old Forester. The clock struck 12. Announcing the arrival of September 1st. I sit in my house at the foot of the Cascade Mountains. The silence here is almost absolute, but for me it is never truly complete. The echo of the explosion, the creatures dying, hiss Lena's whisper. They all live inside me like shrapnel buried in an old wound. On the wall, above the fireplace, hangs the charm, the tarnished, slightly melted copper amulet, the one Claire picked up near the collapsed mine entrance. I carried it for years, then I hung it here. Reminder, a warning. I raised the glass. The whiskey burns my throat with its familiar bitterness, a memory of Ethan, of Lena, of Owen, of those whose names I never learned and whose bones still remain beneath the earth. A memory of guilt that never leaves, only grows quieter with the years. Set the empty glass on the table and turn off the kitchen light. The moon looks through the window, bathing the room in ghostly light. The shadows of the pines outside still look like clawed hands. Then, barely audible, almost beyond hearing, comes a whisper, a woman's whisper. Thank you. Nathan, Lena's voice. Or maybe only my imagination. Worn thin by 35 years of memories, I do not know. But for the first time in 35 years, there is no pain in that whisper, only peace. I look out the window at the dark tree trunks standing guard at the foot of the mountains. For one fleeting moment, I think I see a stretched, disjointed shadow with horned outlines flicker among them. It freezes for a fraction of a second, as if peering into my window, then it dissolves, melting away without a trace as the first timid ray of pre-dawn sun touches the peaks of the Cascades. Did it survive? Is it still hiding out there in deep fissures and fog-filled valleys? Or is it only my own demons refusing to let me go? I do not know. But I know one thing. As long as these mountains stand, as long as the wind whispers through the pines, vigilance is required, because the void is always hungry, and it knows how to wait.